Misconceptions about growing orchids has put a lot of beginners off from even starting, and a lot of them have started and have failed dismally listening to some of this horrendous advice. Today we're going to debunk some of those misconceptions and help you ensure that your orchid grows successfully. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. First of all, the misconception that orchids are difficult to grow, when in fact orchids can be some of the easiest plants to grow. Orchids come from a wide variety of climate ranges, and if you pick an orchid from a specific range that suits your climate, you can probably just go plonk your orchid on a tree and let it grow there wonderfully all by itself. But a lot of us want those amazing blooms inside the house. So how do we go about that? Well, as long as we understand the light, the temperatures, the humidity and the watering conditions that the orchid requires, they actually can be just as easy as any other houseplant to grow. And if you've ever tried to grow calatheas, you know what I'm talking about. So it's merely just choosing the right orchid for your space and ensuring that your conditions are suitable. And then orchids are easy. Another big misconception is your orchids need to be misted all the time. Well, this can actually be quite problematic because now I'm going to have to go dry this Phalaenopsis out. Misting an orchid can put too much water in and around the plant itself. All this water is going to drip into the gaps between the leaves here, and I need to dry those out so it doesn't grow fungus and bacteria, or otherwise I'll end up with crown rot. So misting is not that important, but what is important is humidity, the humidity around your orchid. So if you understand what the requirements of your specific orchid are, it can be much easier to grow. Using evaporation trays underneath or around your orchid, or as simple as getting a humidifier. These are just all easy ways you can do to ensure that your orchid gets the right conditions without having to be constantly making it wet. And clear pots. So many people are telling us you have to plant your orchids in clear pots. They need the light on the roots photosynthesize, etc., etc., etc. But you see, I even grow my Phalaenopsis in pots which are not clear. What does help about the clear pots is that it will give you a view into your roots. So this is especially helpful for beginners who are unsure what's happening in and around their orchid roots. So you can watch for your moisture content, you can watch if you've got root rot, you can check if your media is decomposing, but they are not essential. And not all orchids photosynthesize through their roots. And things like Phalaenopsis, when they are, generally the only reason that the photosynthesis is going to help the plant is if they are in too dark a condition. If there's not enough light for them, then they need that extra photosynthesis that the roots will provide. So clear pots, not necessary. And another thing a lot of people have been told is that orchids will bloom only once. Only once? Not a chance. Often they'll end up with a Phalaenopsis that they'll buy in bloom. They'll put it somewhere in their house and leave it there for the rest of its life, and it never gets blooms again. This is because they're just not looking after it properly. A lot of orchids can bloom multiple times a year depending on how you look after them. Certain Cattleyas can even bloom twice a year, depending on the temperature fluctuations in spring and autumn. If they're matching, often you can get 2 flushes of flowers a year from certain Cattleyas. And we all know Phalaenopsis can also, other than the flowers lasting for up to 6 months, they can flower very soon after a previous flower spike. Once they've finished blooming, all they'll need is a short rest, and often they'll start pushing up that new flower spike again. Another common misconception is a block of ice. Use a block of ice to water your orchid. For one, you're going to cold burn your orchid roots. Those freezing temperatures, and your orchids are from tropical environments, most often. The roots won't like it one little bit. Also, you're going to land up with uneven moisture in your pot. The ice cube's going to melt and just that one single little drop's going to run down the side of your pot, and that's not really doing the thing. One of the ways this misconception came about is that it's the amount of water that's taken to make the ice cube is probably right for one Phalaenopsis. If you're feeding it an ice cube's amount of water per week, that starts getting a bit confusing. So keep your eyes for cocktails. Rather use tepid or room temperature water to water your orchid. From water we go on to fertilizer. I've heard a lot, orchids don't need fertilizer. Not quite sure where these people are coming from when they're saying this. Perhaps if your orchids are out in the trees, maybe. But if you've got an orchid in a pot indoors, I'm afraid you're going to need to learn to feed it. Orchids do need food to grow successfully and to be happy, healthy, and produce flowers. But perhaps we're not going to be feeding them to the same concentration as we might feed our other pot plants. We'd probably want to use 1/4 to half strength, but we're going to be feeding regularly, once a week, once every 2 weeks, and that's going to be ideal for your orchid, because that's basically the way they'd get it out in nature as the rain comes. Small amounts, relatively frequently. The best way is to use a balanced water-soluble fertilizer. I generally like the liquid organic feeds. They don't leave as much salt residue in your plant if you do happen to overfeed. And also we hear this fairly often is orchids must be grown in bark. They grow on bark on trees, so they must be grown in bark. Not particularly. If you look at the climate inside your house or wherever you're growing your orchids, it's best to choose a media that's going to suit your climate and suit your watering techniques, because it all depends on how much water you give them and how frequently, and whether the orchid itself is a water-loving orchid or a moisture-loving orchid, or one that likes to dry out a bit. Things like bark, coir chunks, sphagnum moss, even polystyrene, charcoal, bits of old broken clay pots, and of course even stone. All of these can be successfully used to get happy, healthy orchids. So remember, choosing a growing media that's going to suit your orchid's original growing conditions. So for moisture-loving orchids, use something like a sphagnum moss that's going to hold lots of moisture, and for ones that like to dry out at periods, give them things like bark or stone or polystyrene, where it's just going to flush that water out and still leave lots of air around for the roots. Take in consideration how much water the orchid itself needs and how much you are watering. So you can balance the two out to ensure that your orchid gets the correct moisture. Something we hear all the time, even from some of those professional growers, is you should always cut the flower spike after it's finished flowering. Well, there's some occasions where you shouldn't. If you're just growing your orchids at home and want those other almost instant reblooms with things like Phalaenopsis, all you're going to do is trim that flower stem slightly back to one of those nodes so that it can push another set of buds up through and give you more flowers relatively quickly. With others, we don't want to. We want to set seed. But if you are looking just purely for your home, you don't want your orchid to set seed. You want to cut those flower spikes off as close to the base as possible so that the orchid doesn't use more energy in that flower spike and can push that onto the growing so we can get more flowers sooner. So it's all a matter of what you're looking for out of your orchid. So understanding which orchids are going to rebloom from the old flower spikes is important. If you want to do that, then don't cut them back all the way. And last but not least, we hear orchids need shade. Well, there are some of those orchids that prefer sunlight. In fact, they actually need full sun to bloom. You need to understand your orchid first. And a lot of people make that mistake thinking, the orchid doesn't want too much light. So they put it into a dark part of the room and the orchid stays green forever but never blooms again. Orchids like lots of light. The more light you give them, the better. Of course, with things like Phalaenopsis and certain others, they don't want any direct sunlight because that will then burn the leaves. But the brighter the light, the better, and you'll probably find you get better flowering too. Remember, they've got those nice big leaves to photosynthesize. So the more light you can give them, the more they can photosynthesize. That gives them more energy to bloom. And that's really what we want out of our orchids, especially if we're keeping them indoors. I hope by me debunking some of these orchid misconceptions and orchid care misconceptions that it will help you be more successful in your orchids, or at least give you the oomph that you need to go buy your first one. You won't regret it, and just by listening to your orchid a little bit and understanding it, they can be incredibly easy to grow and so rewarding. So we do put extra information down in the Buy Me a Coffee link down below to help you with your orchid journey. Thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.